but I do want to thank you for taking the time to do
Oh
this
my goodness.
because from my perspective, it's really an important discussion and conversation. And for those who may not remember, the podcast is about sort of exploring your own personal core values and how does that show up in the work that you do, right?
Mhm.
And what I really appreciate about this conversation is that you're coming at it from a perspective as an educator, right? As a professor, so you see a lot more things that I probably don't. And I have had another professor on the podcast a little while ago, so I'm super curious. Not only just about you and your core values, but like, what are
Sure.
you seeing, and how is that sort of manifesting? So I'll shut up here because otherwise I'll talk forever. So,
Yeah.
so Ken, thank you. And now, give me some insight because I'm sure this is not the first time you've talked about core values or had an understanding of it. So, tell me some of your thoughts on core values and what do you think yours are?
Wow, that's a really great opening question, and I think my core values honestly have shifted over time. I think one of my core values increasingly as an educator is transparency and vulnerability. I know leaders like Simon Sinek talk about the value of vulnerability, and I think in the world we're in right now, and as an educator, I think that's one of the best things we can display to the people who we're in charge of. There is this raging fear in people under the age of 30 of imperfection. There's this gnawing self-doubt because of things like social media and because of standardized testing that they're never enough. And we think about, for example, Thomas, guys our age, we weren't involved in the amount of things these young people are involved in terms of club sports, extracurricular academics. The pressure is high for these guys. And at the same time, they are in a world where if they make a mistake, it never goes away. And so,
Yeah.
how do we convince them to be vulnerable? And I think the answer to that, an associated concept, is empathy. Um, my saying that started last year is empathy does not equal agreement. It doesn't mean we have to agree with where somebody's coming from, but we have to understand where they're coming from and legitimize that they have a real experience that is based in their sincere lived experiences. It
Can you
doesn't
say
mean
that
we have
again?
to
Say
agree.
that again. I'm writing it down, but I want to jot
Yeah.
it down again. So empathy does not mean agreement.
Yeah, empathy does not equal agreement. And you and I, for example, probably agree on a lot of things. But a 21-year-old who's had a different life experience and come from a different place than I have may not. That doesn't mean we can't understand each other. And if we can understand where each of us is coming from, that's how we build commonality. That's how we find consensus. And to me, that lesson seems to be lost on those of us of a certain age. And I'm hoping if we look at our world and our politics, my hope is in this next generation who will maybe find a way to develop this understanding better than relying on labels.
Do you think that because my journey, and I've talked about this before in the podcast, like this whole core values thing, I didn't really have an awareness of it realistically until like my 40s.
I
Right.
get
And
it.
you're right. We are men of a certain age and we are
Yep.
beautifully gray. At least I am.
I am too.
You got a better hairline than I do. So, but do you feel that younger generations are more aware of these types of concepts?
I think they can be. I think the trick is, and again, these are my opinions. There's a lot of great books out there. For example, there's a great book that came out this last year called The Anxious Generation.
Ooh,
Think
hold on, the anxious.
The Anxious Generation, and I've read snippets. I full disclosure, I haven't read the whole book. But really, the key treatise is you've got people who are being literally bombarded with so much information from the first time they're put in front of the screen at 4 years old that at some point you become numb to it. At some point,
Yeah.
are you feeling anything? And the idea, can we make them slow down and really get in touch with what's happening in here instead of what they're having to put out here? And to me, I think that as an educator, I don't know, Tom, I'd love to have you like sit in on one of my classes sometimes. I'm
I'd
not
love
afraid.
to. I'd love to because it would be nice to go to classes when I was at college because I spent a lot of time skipping them when I was there.
Well, I think one of the biggest things I try to do frequently is make mistakes. Well, I don't have to try. I make lots of mistakes. But instead of digging my heels in and saying I'm right when I know I'm not, I own them. And I've had students, for example, correct me on something. I won't mention what I was corrected on because it was embarrassing. But I had a student from Europe who understood European politics way better than I did and called me out on something. And I acknowledged he was right. I did the research to after he gave me his answer and I owned it and said, you know what? So and so was correct. And I'm not infallible.
You know,
And
you bring up a very interesting point because I remember back in the day that college and higher education and higher learning was almost like and it's not 100% this way, but it's almost like a two-way exchange or a two-way street, right? You're getting a lot from the professor and the university and everything, but I think the professors, at least when I was there, they also got some feedback from us. I'm not saying it's an equal distribution, but there was an exchange of information between both. It wasn't like you sit there, you do this, and I don't know if that has changed. So you bring up a very interesting point.
I I have a class that I'm teaching now for the first time, Management 230, Studies in Leadership, and I'm teaching it as a seminar. And we're
Ooh.
using Covey's Seven Habits as a framework because it's a great open framework. My students regularly say things that I come home at night and talk to my wife over the dinner table. You're never going to believe what this person said today. Totally changed my frame of thinking. I'm
Oh,
going to
that's
give a shout.
cool.
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to one of my colleagues, Dr. Jane Gleason, who this week at the President's Awards gave her address as distinguished faculty and pointed at one point to the faculty and said, we all learn from you, and then pointed to the students who were there for awards
Yeah.
and showed that it was a bi-directional concept. And I think that is absolutely going to, dude, we got people in the workforce between the ages of 18 and 80. We have to figure this part out.
Yeah, it's definitely I think this challenging, and I have three of my own, and my son is graduating from college this year, so I see.
Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. All the successes that he's had in his life are attributed to you know, for his mother, not necessarily me. You know, I may have been there, but I think a lot of it's been you know, his mother has been the driving factor. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. So it I think there is quite a lot of challenges, and sometimes I forget how ignorant I am of the separation of time. And to your point, like, am I really being empathetic to him and his sisters at this stage? Because for
Hmm.
me, like, my experience was just so different.
Yeah,
So I think that's it's a challenge that we have because you know, you're right. Everything is recorded,
yeah.
right? Everything is like, you know, you're afraid to make that mistake. So you know, I think the only way that we learn is through our mistakes, and that's how we grow. And sometimes I feel like they're handcuffed because they have to maintain this image, or they got to get this job, or they got to get these grades, and you know, all this other kind
Absolutely.
of stuff. Yeah. Anyway.
One of the greatest teachers I ever had. It was in high school. It was advanced mathematics. The guys I am playing geometry and advanced mathematics. His teacher's name was Tom Terza, and he was nuts. And I mean, like when you would walk by his classroom, things were getting knocked over. He was yelling. I was terrified to go in this guy's class. I ended up in his class and found out number one, those were theatrics. That's how we got students engaged. And number two, despite how fiery this man was, if you gave him the following answer, I don't know, he didn't ever yell at you. His follow-up question or follow-up statement always was, it's okay not to know. That's how we learn. He would
Mm.
not fillet you in front of a room if you didn't know the answer. Now, if you were screwing off, you were fair game. But if you were trying, if you were making an effort, he rewarded you with the idea he would not crucify you in front of a room full of people.
So it sounds like that has permeated your style. Am I wrong in that regard?
Absolutely. I absolutely never thought I would be in the classroom. I never thought I would be a teacher. And
Why do
and
you
when
say
I
why do you say that? Well, why do you say that?
it wasn't part of the plan, man. I got recruited into teaching by our mutual friend, Dr. Randy Fry, who saw something in me I didn't see in myself.
Who is a great guy, Dr. Fry.
He
That
is. He's
actually
been
rhymes. That maybe that's a bumper sticker for St. Francis over there. Yeah,
that ought to be.
he's pretty incredible guy.
But he did. He saw something in me I didn't see in myself. Same with Dr. John Miko, who was a friend, saw something in me I didn't see
Miko,
in
yeah,
myself.
Miko and I
Yeah,
were students together at St. Francis.
he was my freshman RA. And Lewis Hall, man.
Yeah,
Uh,
Lewis, that's right. Yeah.
but
Just as a caveat, as a side, I was actually, and people are not going to believe this, I was on what they used to call the geek wing in Lewis. So it was second floor. It was like, you know, and I
Yep.
knew going in, I needed, like, you know, quiet time and study time because I understood where, you know, I was a bit of a crazy one. So I purposely went on that floor because I knew that it would be helpful. And then I
Well,
moved to fraternity a year later.
there was just as many hijinks going on in the geek wing. They were just quiet about it. You know, like the smart kids don't are not necessarily good kids.
Well, I will share this. Like, we actually snuck a keg on the Lewis floor, and that was a pretty interesting experience. And those alumni who were there and know that will love that story. And the RA Pat, who's actually we exchanged messages on LinkedIn, and he was the RA there, but we snuck a keg in on that floor. Anyway, we're getting a little off. Getting a little off on that. I almost forgot what we were talking about. But your teaching style, and I think you talked about transparency,
Oh yeah.
and vulnerability, and as some of your core values that you said that they evolved over time.
Absolutely. When I think about my first jobs out of college, I was thrust into management before I was ready. I was managing people. I was 22, 23 years old and serving as a surrogate for my manager who would regularly drive home or travel home for, anywhere between 4 and 14 days at a time. And I had to be his eyes and ears. And so I was somebody who had all the responsibility and none of the skills. And so what that forced me to do is number one, build relationships. But I did find myself putting on a face. I did find myself putting on armor to try to convince myself I was something that I really wasn't yet. I would say today we call it imposter syndrome. I'd say back then being scared blankless is probably a better description. What I knew was I was going to fail in this endeavor if I didn't make friendships and build relationships. I wasn't bringing as much of my authentic self into my role. I didn't learn to do that. I'll be honest. I don't think I really learned how to do that until I started teaching. And
Mm,
what kind of the revelation was is if you give somebody something to hang on to, this nugget of that's that real person in there, they again are not infallible. They are vulnerable. They like things. Students have this idea that at the end of the day, they unplug us and stick us in closets, and we don't have homes and families and interests. And when you
yeah.
let them in that little part of your world and show the three-dimensional part of yourself, that brings a lot to the relationship. And I think in the workplace, if it's managed well, that can build relationships and loyalty between people too.
Is
I
that where
think
the vulnerability comes in?
absolutely. And I think Thomas is my opinion. Again, I don't have data to back me up. I think here we are 5 years past the pandemic, and I think we've all been encouraged to bring more of our authentic selves to work because at some point when we were working remotely, somebody's call got interrupted by their kids or a dog jumping into frame, or why do we have these virtual backgrounds so nobody can see how messy our homes are? And it's like all of a sudden our bosses became real people too.
Mm, mm, that's very interesting. So, um, how did you meet Fry? If you were working and so what was how did that evolve?
I'm as homegrown St. Francis as it gets. I had Dr. Fry for marketing. I had him for marketing. I forget what the course code was back then. Tuesday, Thursdays, 9:30, same slide he teaches to this day. And I got to meet Dr. Fry when I transitioned into a role. I was working for a technology subcontractor out of Washington, D.C., and I was subcontracted back to St. Francis. And so I ended up doing technology support for Dr. Fry as a fledgling technology manager and got to know him not just as my instructor, Mr. Fry, then Dr. Fry, but also as my friend Randy. And so,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, Dr. Fry, I'm giving him a shout out. He did something really nice for me when I was mid-career, and I never forgot this either. At one point, I did a tech support call for him. He was working in one of the electronic classrooms we have on campus, and there was a problem. And it was a problem I couldn't fix. I didn't have the parts to fix it. So I made a workaround for him so he could get through his class. And I left my personal cell phone number, and I said, Dr. Fry, if you have any problems today, you call me, and I'll drive back to campus, and I'll fix this again for you. He sent a letter to my boss uh, describing how I'd gone above and beyond for him in that moment. And I never forgot that I had somebody who I was just doing what I would do because I like to help people. And he made sure that it got noticed, and I never forgot that. And so,
That's Yeah, that
yeah,
sounds like Dr. Fry.
that's the kind of man he is. I'm glad to work for him. I'm glad to call him a friend.
Yeah, I'm looking at the banner behind you, and obviously, it resonates with me, and I'm wearing my garb today here too. But what's interesting is, and this is what I do love, it's become that someone.
Mhm.
So for those who don't know that, what does that mean? Well, first of all, what does that mean to you?
Well, I mean, we know where it comes from, the whole Stokes Twyman story in terms of Jack Twyman stepping in and becoming the guardian for Maurice Stokes. But I think for me, the internalization of this statement is we're never, let me restart that. We never quit growing and developing. We never quit becoming a new person. I mean, from a biological level, every cell in our body will be replaced at some point. So we can't remain stagnant. And by becoming that someone, we're always working towards something. And I don't think that that's an unhealthy thing. I think that raising standards, opening possibilities, saying to yourself, I have so many friends, Thomas, who are in our age group, who see this as the end of their life. I've hit 50. I am done. I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to develop. And watch what happens to them. They settle into these lifestyles where they're not learning, growing, or expanding their mindset. And to me, I'm 52 and I'm just getting started, man. I am looking toward the next 10, 20 years. I don't want to ever stop growing and changing. And I think I have a very optimistic standpoint, but then again, I get to work with young people every single day. And if you ever see the show What We Do in the Shadows?
No.
Oh, there's an energy vampire. We suck some of the youth from them and take it for ourselves. But
Do you think if you weren't in academia and you weren't surrounded by youth and that energy, that you would have a different perspective?
probably. But I will tell you this. I consult in industry now too. I do work outside of St. Francis, and I will say that the energy that I've gotten from being a teacher, I carry into those situations too. And I really, the majority of my clients are blue collar and manufacturing. Those are the folks who I come in and do management and leadership training and consulting with. And I carry the same energy I carry into an undergraduate classroom. The context is different and the audience is different, but I really do feel that I'm probably doing things in those scenarios I would not have been able to do if I hadn't had 11 years of college teaching under my belt.
Wow, 11 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Goes quick.
Too fast, man, too fast.
So there's another aspect of some of the work that you do too, right? It's around sort of grief and
Mhm.
things of that nature. Can you, I don't know too much about it. I've seen it
Sure.
on some of your LinkedIn posts and things of that nature, but can you tell me a little bit about that aspect of your work?
I am proud to talk about that aspect of my work. I've said this story a few times, so if I go into too many bullet points, like stop me. My relationship with grief and bereavement started very early in my life. I had an estranged father who died when I was around 6, and my mom died when I was 15. And so I was raised by a combination of my grandmother and my aunt and family members. I
Wow.
remember I have a twin brother. Our guidance counselor in public school never talked to us, not once during the entire scenario. I had teachers trying to send me homework home the week I was burying my mother because they didn't want me to get behind in school. And I remember the only person who ever talked to my brother and I about our loss, this is the 80s, remember,
Yeah.
our family doctor offered to prescribe us tranquilizers. And so that was bereavement and grief in the 80s. And I went through my 20s and 30s with a lot of unresolved issues, a lot of unresolved feelings. Started volunteering in my late 30s for a local group called the Healing Patch, where I come in and do peer mentoring work.
Whoa, stop. Why did you go that path? Because a lot of times you hear these stories and there's a different path.
Oh,
So
yeah.
did you almost feel like there was that, point in the road? Like how did you get to that?
Oh, that's a really, Thomas, it's a good question. And I have a habit of skipping over that, but vulnerability is part of this. So
Mm,
I was going through my 20s and my 30s as a very angry person at times. Not in the workplace, not with other people, but just a lot of unresolved, like I've never dealt with this grief. I've never stared at it head on. A lot of self-blame. In terms of like, was there something I could have done differently? And so when I was going through those periods, I buried myself in work. I said I'm going to just work as many hours as I can and be involved in as many things as I can, so I don't have to deal with these feelings. And I had resolved I'm never going to be a married man. I'm never going to settle down and have a relationship because what's the point? Everybody dies. And it was at the end of my 30s. somebody had told me about this group called the Healing Patch, which is a peer mentoring and bereavement group for kids here in Central PA. I said, well, that sounds nice. I'm not really interested. And then two other people within a week told me about the same program. It's like, well, somebody's trying to tell me something here.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I went to the Healing Patch and met the coordinator, a great lady at the time named Allison Stockley. And within 5 minutes of meeting her and seeing how they'd set this program up, I knew I needed to be involved.
Well, let
Uh,
me let me hold on one thing. You had mentioned that
sure.
there was a couple people that had mentioned this place to you. Do you
Yes.
think it's because they saw the anger and your processing or lack of processing of grief that maybe you weren't aware that you were showing? Is
These are
that a valid?
That's a valid question, and these are people who cared very much about me. And so I mean, I will say this: I'm an old heavy metal guy and a metalhead and everything, and I have this kind of black. I wear a lot of black, uh, and they saw right through my armor, and so it was like, yeah, you need to do this, and I will never forget this. I went through the training, ended up getting into volunteering, and I ended up meeting a lot of teenage kids. The teenage room is not, we break these kids up by age group. There's a lot of people who don't want to work in the teen room because teenagers can be challenging.
Yeah.
I wanted to work in the teen room because I wanted to be there for a kid at their time in life like nobody was for me. And I can tell you, Thomas, I met a young person whose circumstances were so similar to my own. It was like stepping into a time warp, and to
Mm.
get to be present for this person while they were going through opening up about their loss, it healed something in me that I can't quite describe. I will tell you flat out that volunteering uh, saved my life. It set me on a positive path. It changed my worldview. It opened me up for love in my life. I wouldn't be a married man to my wonderful wife Melissa if I had not gone through this. And
Shout out to Melissa. Look at this. You
she she is the best thing that ever happened to me, but I wouldn't have let her in if I hadn't had my heart healed. And
Wow.
two other big things happened out of that. Well, more than two things, but two really big things. Back in 2011, a group of my friends and I we saw that funding cuts were coming to the Healing Patch because of the recession. And so we started our own nonprofit, Patch Together Incorporated. So we do a fundraiser every year. We've been doing it since 2011. We've raised somewhere around $180,000 over our 14 years to support these services. And the current coordinator of the Healing Patch, one of my dear friends, Melody Ray, when she knew I was doing doctoral work, asked me if I'd ever considered doing research into bereavement at the workplace. And I said I'd never really thought about that, and it had flown right over my head. Did my dissertation on the impacts of bereavement policy in the workplace, and it's something I regularly consult on now. So I'm helping employers come up with ways to show more compassionate leave policies to people going through the worst days of their life. And
Wow.
the kind of the third prong to all that, my other passion in life, as you know, Thomas, is pop culture and comics. And I teach a senior seminar on Batman at St. Francis now. And a large part of that comes from when I was a kid, I loved Batman more than anything. When I was a struggling college student going through college without parents, I had this incredible relationship with Bruce Wayne. And anytime I was having a bad day at college, I thought to myself, if Bruce can dust himself off with nobody in his corner, I can do the same thing.
Is that because you saw the duality in yourself we're getting really deep here. I apologize. So if I
No,
say something we talk about, they just tell me to shut up and move
I
on.
love
But
talking about this stuff.
it seems like that I can understand how that would resonate because there's a duality to that.
Mhm.
And as you're talking about that, I can see that. Does that resonate?
And Batman is like Sisyphus. He's pushing a boulder up a hill that's going to always roll back down. He can't save everybody. Um, he can't fix everybody's lives, and he's never going to bring his parents back. But if he can save somebody else, even if it's one person, the trauma he's experienced, that is some salve on the wounds that never completely heal. People say that grief, you get over it. You don't get over it. You get past it. You don't get over it. Grief is something that will always be in you. When we lose somebody we care about, that doesn't leave us, but we find ways to integrate it. And to me, being able to be present for people going through it, that's my way of giving back to the people who were there for me when I needed them to be.
Do you feel that your grief has um, amplified your empathy or brought empathy to a different level for you?
Thomas, guys like us, man, people of a certain age, there's this whole problem We cannot get men to talk about grief. And what this is resulting in is stress related injuries. It's related in overwork. It's related in substance abuse. And we have a total lack of men volunteering in this field. We have a few really heroic guys who are willing to step in this mud. But the old adage of just man up and power through it, yeah, that gets you through for a time. And when you're 45 years old with a broken marriage and an ulcer, sometimes you look back and say, what didn't I resolve? Was this what manning up did? No, manning up is saying, I'm going to take the armor off. I'm going to walk into this absolutely terrifying place and face it. That's courage.
Mm. Do you think that there's a space for, what I call core values in that type of work? I mean, it seems
Absolutely.
like, tell me what your thoughts on that, because it seems to me like that would be an interesting place for exploration.
I think one of the toughest core values that people have to kind of adopt if they want to do grief work is to not judge the people they're working with. And here's what I mean. The person you're talking to may be so angry at the person who is gone that that's all they can handle right now. The person that you're talking with may be glad that the person is gone if they were suffering and they feel judged for that. So the biggest core value we can have in that regard, again, empathy does not equal agreement. Can you be in that space with that person and listen to them? Can you be in that space and let them feel whatever it is they're feeling? And can you also realize that it's not a problem to be solved because it's not on a timeline? It's not going to work within a nice confined area that we wish it would. Grief is not something that we can put on a stopwatch. And so the idea of empathy, patience, and non-judgment, I think, are the three most important core values of doing that work. That's my opinion.
Wow. Wow. Your experiences are quite incredible. And how has that influenced your style as a professor?
I think I'm kind of tuned in to students. If I know something is up, if somebody's behaving just a little differently, I'm not going to say it's like a spider sense because everybody has different ways they
Oh,
project.
now you're
You
cheating on
know,
Batman.
I am. But hey, Peter Parker's a grieving kid too, so you know. But I think it's a matter of if you open yourself up and you're vulnerable, you know when somebody's broadcasting, and you know when there's that kid in the back of the room who something's up. The other part of it, I will tell you too, Thomas, once people find out you do this kind of work, sometimes people show up on your doorstep too.
Oh, that's interesting. That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah. And so I've had plenty of kids stop by my office to talk about their own experiences because I'm not afraid to talk about mine.
Wow, that's powerful. I'm just going to take a
It's,
second there. That's really powerful.
I don't know if there's a greater honor that I can feel than somebody feeling the courage to tell a story like that to me. I don't take that lightly. I am in a position as a teacher where I have a responsibility not to just educate these young people, but to be present with them and to be a resource to them, to be an ear. I think that a lot of people who don't really exist in the world of academia, I don't care if it's K through 12, I don't care if it's college, I don't care if it's trade school. There's a type of family relationship that develops between people in these endeavors. And ultimately, I want to say this very carefully because I know that we all have different disciplines. But the root of every academic discipline at some level is helping somebody be a better version of themselves. If When I teach a management class, yeah, I'm teaching how you do a performance evaluation. What I'm really saying is how can you be an ethical and good person when you're doing that? If I'm teaching labor management relations, how can you be transparent and empathetic when you have to go up against somebody who you think might be your enemy? When you are doing leadership, how can you make sure you know where the other person is coming from before you have to make a really hard and impactful decision? Those are making people better versions of themselves. And honestly, Thomas, it's coming back to the stuff you always talk about. It's can you discover your own core values? Can you use that as your roadmap when you're navigating the worst days of your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the interesting thing. Like, become that someone. That phrase opens up, right? It's not just like, how do I articulate this? As you're talking about it, that phrase kept on coming back to me as you were talking, because you're becoming something more than yourself. I'm getting a little choked up here. I apologize. This is
It's
probably
okay.
not appropriate, but it's understanding who that someone is.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is taking that journey to allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to understand what that journey even means. And I think when you're 19 or 18, you're going through the process. I don't know how mindful or how top of mind that is. That's the struggle and the challenge that I think about is, I came to this work much later in life, but what happens, what how would I have been, or what decisions would I have made if I had this type of insight earlier? So
You
I
know,
don't know.
I don't, I think you have to go through it though, Thomas. I think it's one of these things like sometimes even if those insights were presented to us, if we hadn't walked through the fire, I don't know that we'd be ready. But I will say something particular about young people, the challenges they face. I had a conversation a few years back with a young man, and I asked him about what kind of support he was getting in school because he had lost a family member he cared about very much. And he kind of chuckled and he said, "Well, I'd never talk about this stuff at school." And I said, "Well, why?" I said, "Don't you have friends who would be your backup, somebody who would have your back?" And he told me if I told this to the kids in school, they would see it as weakness. It would end up on social media and they'd be using it as leverage against me.
That's terrible.
And so we have this world right now where everybody is so concerned with getting clicks and getting attention
Yeah.
instead of having meaningful connection that a kid has to bear this weight on his own for fear of having retribution for sharing the worst day of his life with somebody who's supposed to be his friend. And so that's the kind of damage we have to undo as adults. And what I say to people who get very frustrated, I do a lot, as I mentioned, I do a lot of work with blue collar folks and industry. And actually, can I share a quick story on this?
Absolutely.
All right, I was doing this consulting gig, and it was a group of managers in a manufacturing plant. These were all people who had worked their way up. We're not talking about college guys. We're talking about people who went through the plant and worked their way up into management. They had school hard knocks. And I asked them at the beginning of our conversation, can any of you tell me what are your big challenges? And this guy put up his hand and he said, young people. And I said, I got to hear some more about this. And I said, tell me what you mean. He's like, well, the other day we were on the line and this the machine broke down and this young guy was on the machine. And instead of coming over and saying something to me, he just sat there and let all the production grind to a halt. And I said, that's a real problem. I said, why do you think he didn't talk to you? Well, all these kids know how to do is talk to their phones, he responded. I said, okay. I said, do you think that's a personal slam to you? Or is that the way this kid was brought up? Oh, it's just the way he's brought up. He can't help it. I said, that's really interesting what you just said. So you're acknowledging this kid is not out to get you. He's not trying to irritate you. He's not trying to make your day worse. You've got to undo this. He's like, well, yeah, I guess you're right. I said, okay, between the two of you, who's more likely to start that conversation, him or you? Well, probably me. I know how to interact with people. I'm like, you're right. We've got several choices we can make here. We can let this continue, which isn't good for your company. We can just say, to heck with it, we'll automate everything and nobody will have to work or have a job. Or we can somehow get into the middle of this and you're probably more likely to start the conversation. But I said to the guys, is there anything about your smartphone you don't know how to use? And he kind of just looked at me. I said, do you have grandkids? Well, yeah. I said, do you know how to send pictures to them on your phone? No. This kid probably does. He could probably show you how to do that if you could show him how to interact with you a little better. And that is how we do two-way mentoring. That's my opinion.
Mm.
I otherwise we can just stay in our corners and we can let the world fall apart. Those of us who have the skills and those of us, Thomas, this is our time, man. We're Gen Xers. We're between worlds and we're the bridge.
Well, and thank you for sharing that story. I appreciate it. It sounds like what you were helping to do is to find almost that common denominator that they can share, they can start sharing and sort of make that bridge. Does that seem like a fair comment?
Yeah, we got to find common ground.
Yeah, I think that's part of this core values journey for me as because my opinion is that like or personal theory is that we're all sort of connected and we have forgotten what that connection is. And I think one way we can realize that is if we start talking about those things that we have in common. And I'm not saying that everybody's core values are the same, and they're not, but at least it's a starting point where people can start to articulate these things, and that to me is pretty exciting.
Regardless of who somebody watches on TV or who they voted for, everybody wants their kids to have a better life than they did. Everybody wants to have a safe place to live. Everybody wants to enjoy themselves and have a good time with the people they care about. And it's like, I'm not saying that fixes all our problems, because again, empathy does not equal agreement, but we've got so much more in common as humans than we have separating us. And unfortunately, we're in an environment now where division is amplified. And in the music business, we use these things called compressors. And this is a good music analogy. I'm a bass player, and so when I'm playing slap and
We
tap, for
won't hold that
example,
against you.
I knew it was coming. But if you turn a compressor up too high, what a compressor does is it boosts the lows and limits the highs. And if you turn it up too high, all you'll hear is the thump and the slap and the tapping. You'll hear the ultra highs and the ultra lows, and the mids get lost. All character in music lives in the mid range. And so we're doing the same thing with our communications. Nobody is having a discussion. There's somebody's outraged, or somebody got owned, or somebody was humiliated. And that's our problem. We're too compressed on this stuff, and we're listening to music in bite-sized chunks.
Wow, that's an incredible analogy.
So
I
I
imagine
believe
that
that.
I imagine that comes up a couple times here and there throughout the semester.
I definitely, one of my favorite things every semester, Thomas, and I'll never ever tell my students my political beliefs or who I vote for, but I will tell them that they should have an opinion. And what one of my favorite things to do, I teach this management and labor relations class. And so we split the class into union and management. And some of the most pro-union guys in the world end up as managers, and some of the most anti-labor people in the world end up in the union. And to watch them own those roles, you better believe that they both want a better contract. And so again, empathy, man, they get to see it from somebody else's perspective.
That's cool. I'd love to see a class that sort of argues Gibson versus Fender and the pros and cons of.
Let's see here. Hold on one second. Uh, I will reveal that side of the argument.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's terrible. That's mine is over there. I'm going to hold on a sec here.
uh-oh. Are we
Now,
gonna
now
find
you
out?
really got me. You got me going on this one. You really got me a little perturbed.
Oh, we got it. Wow, very nice, by the way. What's your model there?
This is a
Oh,
And by the way, and I know people are going to watch this and see this and say, "What? Who cares?" But this is an original 1972.
oh my goodness.
So it's a deluxe. You can see the mini humbuckers. You can see the sort of the two sort of comes together and there's a binder in the middle. But
Yeah.
yeah, this thing is a beaut.
Where did you get that?
I've been trying to get guitars of a certain year, and I was researching, and I found one online, and then I couldn't let go of it. It took me a couple of years to find it, and I actually brought it to
Wow.
a guitar shop in New York City, 30th Street Guitars, and I had them take a look at it once I got it, and they sort of helped me verify that this thing is. I mean,
Oh
even
man.
like that the neck is, you can see it back in the day. They used to shave the necks down a little bit to make them nice and
Yeah.
yeah. So this thing is a legit.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and another reason why it's so special because I told you it's a 72, and that's the year I was born. So I'm a 72 guy. So
Well, since we're talking fun facts, I don't have it handy, but my oldest bass is a 72 Fender Jazz, that I was gifted by a fellow St. Francis alum, Darren Denny. He actually, now the neck and the body are not matching. They're from two different bases. It was reassembled, and it's a beaut. But there is something awesome about those old 70s guitars.
yeah, that's for sure. Everything about that you just mentioned sounds amazing, other than the fact that it's a Fender.
Well, hey, you know what? If Gibson if Gibson would have got on the bandwagon with long scale basses before the Thunderbird, they would have had a chance.
Yeah, I only joke because I know the Fender basses are quite a beautiful piece of art. So, and that's what
Uh,
I consider this is. I mean, it's like artwork for me.
It's gorgeous. It's
Yeah,
absolutely gorgeous.
it's one of my prized possessions. And I have another one. I have a 68 VOS, which is
Wow.
another Les Paul, and I'll show that another time. And I got a couple other ones lying around
Oh
here. So
man, nice
anyway,
stuff.
so do you feel that, and that that's another podcast we can episode we can just have talk about that for hours. um you obviously have a set of core values that you operate from that are your guiding light. Do you feel that some of the organizations that you've worked with, or or even been a part of, have that similar type of what I'll call values framework?
Oh, I do. I mean, the funny thing is, Thomas, like when we guys
I'm
like
just gonna
you and
put
I,
this down here, so hold a second. Sorry, before I lose it.
well, when guys like us first get into the workplace, sometimes we take a job because we need a job. Um, and then when you are lucky enough to get in that place in your career where you can choose where you spend your time, I think it's really important to make sure your values align with where you're at. I think if I think about how my current employer and hopefully the employer I retire from, St. Francis, matches up with my core values, it's the one of our core values that is stated is respect for the individual and humble and generous attitude toward learning. And those have empathy all over them. And the idea being that somebody doesn't elevate themselves over somebody else and that we can learn from each other. And I see that played out on a daily basis. And in my hallway in Schwab Hall, when I listen to the conversations that are happening between students and faculty members, those sound like friends or families talking to each other. Now, there's education happening. This is not somebody shirking their duties as an educator, but it's also a person who doesn't just know that this kid needs help with accounting, that they need help with something happening at home. And we don't have that if we don't get to know people. And that's respecting the individual. And that is that humble and generous attitude toward learning. And I think one of the reasons this institution aligns so well with my core values is that familiarity. Full disclosure, my undergrads call me Dr. Tonkin. If you're a master's student or a doctoral student, I'm asking you to call me by my first name. Just because I have a doctoral degree doesn't mean I'm any better at life or any better at anything than the person I'm working with. And I refer to that as well. I'm not teaching you, I'm working with you
Mm.
because we've got things we can learn together. Now, at the undergrad level, yeah, I'm doing some fundamental teaching, but we're still moving toward that other end of things. And this is my own personal practice. On the day a student graduates, although so many of them are uncomfortable with this, I ask them, "Hey, next time you see me, feel free to use my first name.
Oh,
We're
they can't do
friends."
that. You know that. Like I can't call Dr. Fry Randy. That's impossible.
I know it's awkward, but the few kids who've done it, it changes the nature of the relationship. It really
Oh, that's
does.
interesting.
And it's no longer for whatever reason somebody's no longer holding you on a pedestal. They're holding you as part of their family, and to me it's like that little transition makes a big difference. I won't name the student because he's so humble. I don't want to embarrass him, but one of my recent grads, I broke him of that habit, and honestly just had him as a guest speaker in one of my classes, and to see him as a fully fleshed out professional in the height of his career, and knowing that that is not just one of my former students. This is somebody who's now part of my extended family. That's the best thing in the world.
You said 11 years you've been teaching now.
I'm finishing my 11th year at the end of the beginning of May here.
So you're starting to see these seeds that you put out there start to sprout and grow. They're catching their careers right on the upside like that. They're not
Yeah.
beginners anymore, right? You're seeing some of those fruits of that labor that you're putting in there.
Oh man, I was in a one of my former students. If he watches this, my the first student I ever met at St. Francis University as a full-time faculty member. I'm giving the shout out to you, sir. His name's Lawson Barter. I met him my very first day teaching at St. Francis. He walked into my office, stuck out his hand, and introduced himself. I didn't know him from Adam. And he's like, "You're Kent Tonkin, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, I am." And he's like, "You're doing a Batman event, and I want involved." And like, literally told me he was going to help me. And I'm like, "I'll definitely take your help." I ended up being his advisor for Psi Upsilon, the fraternity of which I'm now an honorary brother. And a few years back, when Lawson got married, I was in his wedding. I flew to Chicago to
Wow.
be in his wedding. And my one of my other students who graduated a few years back, Hannah, I was got to see her get married. And when you see people bringing their kids back to campus, and when they are posting on LinkedIn about these great careers they're having, and to think you got to play a tiny little part in their path. Like my wife and I don't have kids, unfortunately, and I get to live vicariously through everybody else's to see what they got to experience.
That is that. Thank you for sharing that. That is amazing. It become that someone, keeps resonating. I mean, you really, I call it values congruence, as you
Mm,
articulated. So it's not like everybody's values ultimately aligned 100%. That's just not reality. But when you're working with people, whether it's groups, teams, companies, organizations, that congruence is important because I feel once you have that wellspring of energy, enthusiasm, creativity, loyalty, trust, all that, comes from that. So
yeah.
thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. So one of the things I'm curious about, and I don't want to spend, I don't want to take your entire day here because I have a funny feeling if I did, we could. But as you go through or you think about the journey you've had thus far, who would you say are a couple of your heroes? I can imagine a couple, but I'm curious what you would say. Who are your heroes?
Boy, I don't know where to start, but I'll name a couple and people who were there for me when I needed them. My wife is my biggest hero. Like she is, I know that's a correct answer, but uh, she is maybe the best human being I know in terms of somebody who really she doesn't forget birthdays. She buys little knickknacks for people when they have significant moments in their life. She's present for people when they're having bad days, and she's not doing this out of any other reason other than that's just who she is. And she's just in addition to being the love of my life, she is the best human being I know, and puts up with a lot with me some days too. So she's she'd be the first person I would think of. Other heroes I would think of. The people who run the Healing Patch, whether it's Melody Ray and Shaylin Steinbugle, who are the people who are the current administrators, and all the volunteers there are my friend Allison Stockley, who founded it. The very fact that these folks sought out dollars and resources to help an audience that was very dear to my heart makes them heroes to me and anybody who volunteers. I don't care what your cause is. If you are giving of your time because you care about other people, you're a hero to me. So and there's one other person actually. I'll never forget this person. Two people actually. When I went through the worst parts of my life, one of my best friends on the planet is a guy named Bob McGarvey, and we were in a band together in high school. And my mom died in November, and his dad died in December, and we were in the
Wow.
same band. And
Wow.
we have a bond that's hard to describe. And that man has been there in ways I can't even describe. When my brother's house burned down and I had to go into the house and rescue his guitars, my friend Bob, who was recovering from COVID, uh, used it as his hobby and recovery tool to refinish and rescue my brother's guitars. I dropped
Wow.
off these smoke damaged, irreparable instruments, and he returned them to like new condition.
Wow.
And and I had a friend. This is somebody I wish I saw more often. His name's Eric Rolls. When my mom died, his mother pulled him out of school so that he could be at my house with me that day, so I wasn't there by myself.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
never forgot that. I don't see him enough.
Hmm.
He's kind of one of my long lost friends. I got to reconnect with him a few years back, and we have fallen back out of touch. But I sure wish we were in touch. And I'm leaving off so many people. Thomas, I've been lucky that anytime I needed a human being, somebody was there.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds like it. That's amazing. Just curiosity, when did music come in your life?
Oh boy, when I was about 15, I was in study hall, and a bunch of us thought it would be this killer idea to form a band. And everybody picked an instrument. And the only thing left was bass. And so this is a wild story though too, man. Again, you could stop me anytime, but what
No,
happened
no.
was I was getting a ride to school with my mom, and I had mentioned, "Hey, we're forming a band. Uh, I think I'm going to be a bass player." I mentioned it to her one time, and that Christmas, she got me a brand new, you'll love this one, a Gibson Epiphone power bass. So my first bass
Ooh.
was a Gibson product. And anyway, we formed a band over winter break and started playing shows. This is true story. The Friday before Thanksgiving, I played my first gig, and my mom was there, and she died on Sunday.
Oh.
And so she gave me the best present. I should have mentioned her as my hero too. Like she gave me the best present ever, Thomas. Like having a bass and having the resources to be able to step in and do music helped me pay my way through college, helped me get my most of the people who are important in my life right now are all people I've met through music, including my wife. If my
Mm.
mom hadn't listened to me on the way to school and bought me a bass that, as a totally random thing, I wouldn't have the life I have now and the friend network I have. And
So
so,
what year was that? You were 50. What year was that?
1988.
Okay.
Yeah, 1988 she died, and it was but yeah, when I think about it, man, like at St. Francis, I didn't know how I was going to make it through my last couple of years, and I played bass in a country band, and I'm not even a
Wait,
country
what do you
music
mean you
guy.
didn't know how you're going to make it through your last couple of years? What is it?
There was no money, you
Oh,
know.
oh, you mean as a student?
Yeah, there was
Okay,
there
I
was
thought you were
no.
talking about as a professor. I'm like, what do you
Oh
mean?
no.
No, no. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I had the ability to go out and play gigs on the weekends, and that helped me pay my tuition.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's a cool story.
So again, my mom gave me the best gift ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was sort of a side question. I apologize, but it was just curious. So thank you for sharing that. That's cool.
Sure. So,
Um, if people are listening to this, and hopefully, some will, um, what are like one or two key takeaways you would like somebody to have after listening to this?
well, I think the first takeaway would be when you're interacting with someone, try to listen twice as much as you speak and try to think where they're coming from. I think that I've been wrong when I judge people. I think we get strong first impressions from people, but they can be wrong. I think listen more than you speak and try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. I think the more we can empathize, the more we can build connections, and we might not agree on everything, but we're losing this. We're losing this ability to do it. That would be my biggest takeaway lesson is try to find some empathy.
Hmm, very cool. Well, my friend, I have a funny feeling this may be, one of many conversations that we have, whether it's podcasts or not. So I can't thank you enough for the time. And I appreciate your enthusiasm, your energy, your authenticity, your vulnerability in this conversation. And I'm looking forward to talking again.
Truly my pleasure, Thomas. I'd talk with you anytime.
Thank you.